Hello, I will be presenting my final project for the Causal Inference class. I apologize in advance for the noises you are going to hear. There's not a quiet place in the whole house, so I will try to keep them as quiet the best I can. So the topic that I chose, or the research question, in other words, that I chose to do was, is ADHD symptomology a predictor of who receives social skills training, and does gender play a role? Now, as far as social skills training, the research does show that when paired with other interventions, it can reduce a lot of problem behaviors that tend to be exhibited in the classroom and in schools. A lot of studies that were done did show that there's a documented association between ADHD and social problems. So we know that there's a need. Also, most importantly, research has shown that the impairments, the social skills impairments, are most pervasive for students with ADHD. So they can affect the relationships that they have. I think that says a lot to the behavioral issues that we tend to see in the schools with students with ADHD and getting along with peers. So I think that plays a big role, which also is highlighted with the next point, is that they tend to be less well liked and more rejected. So they don't have those skills that allow them maybe to deal with conflict, or to approach just their overall approach on how they approach friendships. And there also tends to be high levels of familial conflict. That could be related to the difficulties that are experienced in the schools. So maybe if teachers calling every day and telling you that little Johnny is not listening or acting up, I can see how that kind of conflict would spill over into the home. Or maybe it's just more of the same deficits that you're seeing, the consequences at home as well. Um, Unfortunately, the research does show that these social skills deficits, the effects do spill over into adulthood. So it's not something that they grow out of, or as they get older, it's not an issue. There are long-term negative outcomes associated with these social skills deficits that are not addressed. So we think of emotional regulation as something that's associated with ADHD. Well, we also see that it's associated with social skills deficits. Sorry. So some of those things are related to the low frustration tolerance, overexcitability to emotions, slow return to emotional baseline, socially inappropriate behaviors, and emotional inflexibility. So those are all things that could improve with social skills training. So there is a need there. A meta-analysis that was done, since my question does also focus on gender, I did look up a meta-analysis that revealed several differences between the genders and students with ADHD. 18 studies were included due to those were the ones that met the criteria. And this meta-analysis included things or studies that incorporated primary symptomology, intellectual and academic functioning, comorbid behavior problems, social problems, and other family variables. So the results were kind of mixed. It did show no differences in gender based on for the domains of impulsivity, academic performance, and social functioning. But there were differences in girls' level of greater intellectual impairment, lower levels of hyperactivity, and lower rates of externalizing behaviors. So I thought those were kind of interesting just because, well, the social functioning, there was no difference, but there were lower rates of externalizing behaviors for girls. So, you would think that if the social functioning was the same, that maybe the rates of externalizing behaviors might also be the same. I think externalizing behaviors tend to be the ones that cause a little bit more problems at school and in social settings. So I thought that was interesting that there wasn't a difference, but I was interested to see how it played out with the data that was used for this research study. So of course, the sample was obtained from the CDC National Survey of Diagnosis and Treatment of ADHD, which included the ADHD and Tourette syndrome data. 2008 and 2084 caregiver or guardian respondents were interviewed, and information was collected about their children with ADHD and Tourette syndrome. The ones that I included for this one only had either ADHD only, or they were a combination of ADHD and Tourette syndrome, but there wasn't any that were solely Tourette syndrome that were included with this portion that I did. So this sample was a follow-up survey that was conducted in 2011 and 2012, also with children with ADHD and Tourette syndrome. So for my analysis, I did an exploratory factor analysis, and then a binary logistic regression, and then the data was further analyzed using a ROC curve analysis. So I performed a maximum likelihood exploratory factor analysis with a Promax rotation to examine the factorability of 25 items. So of those 25 items, I ended up using those 25 items throughout the whole study. I didn't delete items. So the Kaiser-Meyer-Olkin measure of sample adequacy was 0.993, which was good because it was above the recommended 0.6 value. And the Bartlett's test of sphericity was significant. So those kind of gave the go-ahead, like, okay, this is a good sample, keep on going. So then I did obtain a four-factor solution that was revealed by examining the eigenvalues greater than 1. And we also took a look at the scree plot to see which factors were above that elbow. So those four factors that were identified did account for 63.9% of the variance in the items, which was good. And according to Beavers et al. 2013, the oblique rotation was best suited for this data because the data was considered to be correlated. And I'll mention that I did suppress the coefficients below 0.3, so those didn't even show up in the results. So then there's a picture of my scree plot, and you can see those four factors that are above the elbow. So that looked pretty good. And then I like the organization of that. So then I have my four factors, and you'll notice that the first one, the items are about things like driven by a motor, talking too much, difficulty playing quietly, climbing excessively, leaving seat, fidgeting. So I believed that those were all describing or measuring a construct that I labeled hyperactivity, which is something that's typically associated with ADHD. And then I had my other items that were things like not listening, distracted, difficulty following through, difficulty organizing. So I associated those with the construct of impulsivity. And then the next ones were pretty much all about academics and school performance. So I labeled that one academic skills. I guess it could just be called academics, or I guess it's fine, academic skills. The next and last factor all pertained to these students. There were all questions about how they have relationships with peers or family, their activity in social sports or things like that, social activities. So that one, factor 4, I labeled social skills. And I also added the communalities on table 1. And then there's my factor correlation matrix. It doesn't look that good. So from what I understand, these values here, the 0.174, I want to say that above zero point 0.3 was good. I'll have to look that up. I don't have it handy, but I'm pretty sure those are not good. So that was a red flag that not all those factors were correlated. And I would think, so factor 1, 3, and 1. So if we look back there, the academic skills and the hyperactivity, those had the low number. So I can kind of see how that might happen. Okay, so then I performed the logistic regression, specifically the binary logistic regression, because that was appropriate because there was only going to be 2 outcomes, so possible outcomes. So either, yes, they've had social skills training, or no, they haven't. So the dependent variable, which measures the likelihood of being recommended for social skills training, was 1, was labeled as 1, and that 1 was equivalent to a student having had the ADHD, with ADHD having had some form of social skills training. And there were red flags. So I would think that maybe associated with those, with these low values, I'm still learning. So I'm thinking that's what that was. But so the chi-square value was 26.01. And here, if you notice, the p-value was 0.18, which indicated that my new model was not statistically better than the baseline model. It didn't improve, the model didn't improve with the addition of my explanatory variables, which is not good. So then the Nagel-Karki R squared was 0.12. So indicating that only 1.2% of the variation is what I gathered from the research. So indicating that only 1.2% of the variation in the outcome can be accounted for by my new model, which is bad. So one of all of the items, only one item had some kind of statistical significance, but I don't really think that is of any importance. So I added this on, but I think typically, since there were those red flags, you'd stop and rethink or go back and change some of that. But for the purposes of just, I guess, examining what we have at this moment, gender as a predictor was not significant and had a value of the 0.112, which indicated that 112, okay, it shows there is a positive relationship, but between gender and having received social skills training, but that coefficient implies that it's not anything to write home about. In other words, so that 1 unit change in gender, a 1 unit change in gender would result only in a 0.112 unit change in the log of the odds. So, the odds ratio is greater than 1. This would suggest that the probability of receiving social skills training increases due to gender, but only very minimally, 1.2 times more likely. So all of the remaining variables were not significant. And I'll show you that table. So here was the one that was, but I mean, overall it was not good. So then things got that. I'm not surprised then with the ROC curve that was pretty terrible. So here the area under the curve had a value of 0.518. And according to the literature, 0.5 to 0.6 equals failure. So in other words, my screeners know better than randomly guessing. So that was pretty much the end of that. The results, so the statistical analysis that were performed for this study did not result in any statistically significant results. Based on the logistic regression and the ROC analysis results, this measure would not be appropriate to use as a predictor for who receives social skills training, so it's worthless. However, I think the topic area is not worthless. So because social skills impairments were highlighted in the research as being among the most pervasive for students with ADHD, it is an area that would warrant more research that should be done. I'm not exactly sure how would one go about doing that, but maybe I think just researching. So if this is such a pervasive need, um, and if these effects can have such terrible outcomes for these students with ADHD, um, why are we not giving more social skills training? Why are we not giving more supports so we can try to decrease those negative outcomes for these people with ADHD? So let's see what else I wrote. I've just put, it's noteworthy that although the extant literature identifies social impairments as a major area of concern, oh, right, the National Survey of Diagnosis of Treatment. So you would wonder, with this large sample of students that were included that do have a diagnosis of ADHD or Tourette syndrome, why were more not receiving? Why did they answer that they weren't receiving or have never received any kind of social skills training? So that's interesting, and I do think it's an area to explore further. And that concludes my presentation. I have enjoyed the class. Thank you.